everyone. Welcome to the first episode, I guess, of This Week with PRN. I'm Tony Jordan. I'm the president of the Parking Reform Network, and I'm here with Sam Sklar.
So, hey, Tony, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to start this journey with you. You are right. I am Sam Sklar. I am the lead author of a newsletter that goes out semi-weekly called Exasperated Infrastructures. You can subscribe on your devices for free. And yeah, I'm excited to join you today to talk about all things parking.
Great. I guess the format of this is our first episode, so everyone's a new listener. Is We're going to talk about things that were just in our weekly newsletter. Not everyone reads the newsletter. That's fine. Not everyone subscribed, but we want to provide more opportunities for people to engage with great parking content. So in this last newsletter, we ran a post that Sam made about a webinar that we had a couple weeks ago. It was on July 16th. We had a webinar, Autonomous Vehicles and Parking Reform. We had a great panel featuring Andrew Miller, Rachel Weinberger, and Miriam Pinsky. It was a good discussion. Sam has been watching too much autonomous vehicle content, I think. It seems like there was a series of panels at Hunter College in New York that had some press coverage that you attended, and then you watched this webinar. And so I'm curious what your overall impression is comparing the two. There was at least one speaker at both of them, but yeah, what's your overall impression? I want your read on what you learned or what you want to learn.
Yeah, so there was a secret middle one that I didn't write up. It was a legal symposium at NYU Law School back in, I think it was May or June, and that sort of gave me a different perspective about the legal challenges of bringing AVs to a city or even talking about the technology itself. One of the things that most excites me is that this world is very new for a lot of people. There are folks that have been working on this, of course, for decades, but for people who study transportation planning or who are interested in cities, the field is pretty wide open, and there's lots of different opinions and great ideas that can be hashed out on podcasts, on webinars like the one that you did with PRN a couple weeks ago. There was the in-person one that happened at Hunter College, and then the another in-person symposium that I mentioned at NYU. But the format is secondary to the content, I think. There are a lot of people who are working out their own opinions and how to talk about them in public, which is fascinating to me. And it gets me to really think about how people with different backgrounds, different expectations, different hopes for the future for AV technology can get in a room and really have a productive conversation. That's what I found with this last one. You organized a really interesting group of folks who are boosters for the most part, and some folks who are particularly skeptical, and then a third person who was in between, focused on the mobility and the shared use of it all. So I really liked the format of this. I hope we can have some more of these conversations going forward in the future, because I think no matter even when the technology starts to become ubiquitous, we're going to need to have conversations as the conditions change.
Right. Yeah, thanks. So I was just read over your blog post again. Thank you for writing that. And I have a couple questions and some observations, and I thought we could expand on a little bit. First, I think it's interesting to think about the audience for this. One of your initial Andrew Miller, when he started out, kind of had the intro spot on our webinar, you know, was talking about whether this technology is real or not. And your comment was something along the lines of, pretty much everyone in the industry knows this is real. That's not really a question. But one thing I observed just being out in the discourse, in urbanist spaces and in transportation advocacy spaces, is it does seem outside, that there is a lot of question of whether this technology is real, whether anyone wants it. And one of the reasons I wanted to have this webinar is to kind of break down that no, there are people who want this technology, or this technology is there. What do you observe in the discourse that you are exposed to around what are the vibes on AV that you see out there?
So I think the first thing I'll say is AVs seem more real whenever they're picked up by larger and broader news outlets when there's an issue, when there's a problem, right? This is a function of the greater news landscape, and also of transportation technology. We hear about Waymos, we hear about Teslas, we hear about Zooks and the other brands that are building the capacity when there's an issue. And I don't want that to be the prevailing narrative going forward. It will be great, and this is why I think it's so important to keep having these conversations and broaden the audience of them to understand that this is not a new mode of transportation, but rather a new technology, a new application on a current mode of driving of a single occupancy vehicle all the way up to maybe a bus or a shared shuttle or long haul trucking using this autonomous technology. And so the vibes I'm hearing from my friends outside of the industry, I'll get a ping or someone will shoot me a note and say, "Hey Sam, did you hear about the Waymos going around in circles in San Antonio, or this one getting bricked by a half an inch puddle, or the grid going out in San Francisco and the Waymos not being able to move and clogging up the streets?" And that's really setting the negative precedent. And I think it's important that we all examine this technology, whether we want it or not, on the hopes and dreams and the expected outcomes that we can have. And so I think dispelling, I think what Andrew's point is always sort of dispelling these nominal rumors, right? That are this technology is if it is real, then it's all automatically, bad or not helpful for the shaping of our cities. But I wanna just say that more positive articles around the technology and things that it can do rather than the things that it can't do would probably be the best course going forward. And I can, looking forward to having those conversations as well.
Mhm. Great, thanks. I think, obviously safety is a big piece here, and there's a lot I think of different angles you could come at this from. There's some frameworks that I think are pretty reasonable. Andrew Miller mentioned Families for Safe Streets releasing their Safety First Always framework, which is kind of a gain and guard rule where you set AVs need to be 10 times safer demonstrably over a number of averaged among a number of environments, and they can't fail in any one environment, right? And it seems very,
Mhm.
very reasonable. It's also, I think, probably a little bit, there's a little bit space for the current like Waymo or the other companies on the streets right now to grow to actually meet those
Mhm.
standards, but they're very close, if not meeting them already. There's also this framework that you mentioned in your post, the Phil Koopman um, framework around whether AVs are how to certify autonomous vehicles. And then there's discussion out there around there was just a report, I'm not sure if you had a chance to read it yet, from Open Plans that came out a couple weeks ago around safety and comparing specifically New York for hire drivers versus Waymo's safety record. And one of my frustrations around this is there's several, I think, like I said, reasonable approaches to this. Whether or not I agree entirely with them is beside the point, but they're working towards a direction. And then there's the kind of the discourse on the street, what's going on in my city hall, for example. Maybe they're trying to prevent all autonomous vehicles in the city. And one of the things about this Open Plans report is like there's this mention of, these crashes that involve fatality crashes that involve Waymo vehicles. And when you dig into it, they're really like I've said it's kind of like saying a house is involved when a driver crashes into it. Like these are Waymos that were
Mhm.
stationary legally in certain areas. Someone hit other vehicles or the Waymos, and it's led to unfortunate fatalities, but these are not actors insofar in the space insofar as that weren't the vehicles weren't could have done nothing differently. And I'm not saying that's going to be the case forever, but it just really feels like we can't have a normal conversation around this topic, around how dangerous the status quo is, and just I just personally feel like almost anything is better than the status quo right now. How do we bring this back? I gave you a lot there, but what do we how do we have a normal conversation around this?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Tony. Every year our roads we kill somewhere between 42 and 45,000 people on our roads every year, right? There's a percentage of those that are pedestrians, there are a percentage of those that are vehicle on vehicle, and then there are sort of the edge cases. And one of the prevailing narratives, to your point, to use your words, um, we've sort of treated that as a cost of doing business in this country, that these are acceptable fatalities for us to be able to move from point A to point B as fast as we possibly can, really without thinking of the repercussions, right? The one of the major challenges in doing the work that we do, Tony, and let me know if you agree, is that a lot of the information that helps people make smart decisions about moving on the road is counterintuitive. We're fighting through the intuition, for example, that
Mhm.
widening a highway makes driving faster, makes moving in a car more competitive compared to uh, trains or buses or other forms of public transit. And it's really hard to first you have to dispel that narrative, then you have to make the positive case for the idea that you're trying to enter into the sphere of ideas, the the arena of competitive of ideas here that I think PRN has a great seat at the table for. So really, it comes down to better communications. And I know that's a very vague thing to say, like, what does that mean? I think it really is trying to meet people where they are. If someone has reasoned themselves into a position, you can work to reason themselves out of it. Otherwise, there is going to be this constant push against cultural shift, which is going to take decades to undo our car dependency generally, and then trying to replace one to one a car with a driver with a car without a driver. I think it's something that people have trouble imagining, and so telling stories about it is really hard. Everyone thinks of a Jetsons future or a future where this is science fiction when it's becoming our reality. And I think marrying all these narratives together is going to be a really key point. And folks, this is why again I'm going to keep pushing this. We need to just keep having these conversations, even if it's sometimes it feels like we are yelling into a void. Right? Somebody
Mhm.
will come across this conversation in the future and learn something and feel less terrified or less skeptical, or to Andrew's point, to feel that these are real. This is a real technology that can have a meaningful effect on people's daily lives.
Right, and that ties into this last kind of question I had around your write-up, which is there was a section where a part of the webinar where Miriam Pinsky discussed maybe, we talked about deadheading and how deadheading is a big topic with both autonomous vehicle services and with Lyft and Uber. And I think, I often point out there's a lot of deadheading that goes on just in our daily lives. It's just not called that. And one in particular was the school drop-off line. And Miriam
Hmm.
had said, hey, maybe these autonomous vehicles will be taking our kids to school. And you said, from your blog post here, this amounts to wish casting. I don't see where a bunch of children are being whisked off in AVs without deep parental guidance. And I think that was interesting in that when we talk about the alternate effects, and one part of this I wanted to push back is that Miriam also says, many parents would also feel a lot safer having their kids bike to school if other cars were Waymos. And I think this feeds into to a number of factors where the narrative or the change that people feel that's not as quantifiable can lead to some big gains from just accepting that this technology exists and is not inherently evil. And I and I
Hmm.
and so I wanted, like, and I would also push back, that there's, in other countries, like there's that TV show in Japan where,
Hmm.
3-year-olds go and do an errand. It doesn't have to be the case that we're hawking over our parents. And I hope actually people aren't putting their kids in Waymos necessarily to drive them to school, especially if it's a neighborhood school. But I just wanted to revisit that section and
Hmm.
see if you have any, if that, changes any of the perspective here.
Yeah, of course it does, Tony. I mean, I was being a little bit harsh on Miriam's point. I think of my friends who are parents. I am not yet a parent, but I think of my friends who are parents, and this idea of setting their kid off in a Waymo where maybe they're not driving the car, but they're worried every single second of the ride until they get to school. I'm not sure that's actually saving anybody any time necessarily. Plus, to your point, Tony, we're just adding more and more trips in single, literally single occupancy vehicles if they're not going to share, which I think defeats a lot of the purpose of shifting our mobility and the narrative around movement. So to your point, I think you made the exact right corollary there, which is let's build communities where driving to school with or without a driver in the front seat, moving to school can be done on foot, on bike, in multi-purpose carpools or vans that can then move kids without having to be whisked away in a Waymo, or parents driving and waiting on a long school pickup and drop up line, which has such adverse effects on time wasted, on clogging up streets for no good economic reason. And to the point where probably if I'm sending my kid to school, my imaginary future kid to school on a bike, I probably would feel safer knowing that there are more autonomous vehicles that have programmed to look out for um, my kid. They can't be distracted. They can't have uh, movements that are not expected. Knock on wood. So I would feel safer on a one-to-one basis for having that technology being ubiquitous on the streets. But there's one more point I wanted to bring up, Tony. Here, I know we wanted to get to some other articles, but it was this assumption of inevitability that I think
Mhm.
Andrew brought up, which I've been trying to work into the way that I think. There is a narrative that's being pushed by people who want something to happen, that this is an inevitable option, an inevitable outcome, and that we need to make sure that our cities are ready for autonomous vehicles, whether they're driven or whether they're robo taxis or shared, or they're fleets that are of municipal governments. Um, this narrative of inevitability, which I think is something that we should just be wary of. Probably, if these big companies want this to happen, there will likely be a push, but I don't think we need to just assume that this is going to happen because somebody with a vested interest in it happening says so, and that we better get used to it. It's the devil's choice, right? The like it or not, right? It's either or. It's not an either or whether we have it or not. It's, do you accept it or do you get left behind? Which I think is a scary narrative, and the way that not to get too into my bag here, but Capital talks about pitting these cities against one another. They're going to assume that there is uh, uh, a an end here, which has most of the fleet being replaced one to one, or at least some to one, with autonomous vehicles. When what I would like to focus on with our limited capacity for narrative is how can we make biking, walking, and public transit better alongside
Mhm.
driving. So I just want to that's one thing that I just want to make sure. And I got this idea from Cory Doctorow's new book, The Reverse Centaur, which I think he's just a fantastic thinker on AI, and there's an applicability there to autonomous vehicles. The A and AV and AI are similar in that way.
Okay, I have to check that out. We didn't talk a lot about transit in the topic in our
Mhm.
webinar, and I think when you were talking about these kids being driven to school, it just made me think one of the approaches here we have to implementing this technology in transit is, and it could apply great for a school for school bus transfer for school transportation is an autonomously driven van with an adult inside whose job is not to drive the van but to actually monitor and engage with the children or with the passengers,
Yeah.
right? Like there are some models of this where we don't actually reduce the humans out of the system. We don't remove the humans from the system. We give them jobs to improve the trip, to improve the
Mhm.
quality of transit, which we know is one of the big issues around people riding it in the first place, is if they feel unsafe and uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
if you can reallocate those humans on the system so they're not watching the road, but
Mhm.
engaging, providing service guidance to folks in the vehicles, whether they be children or adults or elderly people who are adults. That's a way to go. I want to mention we're going to continue this conversation. PRN, it's in the newsletter from last week. We've been working for months on putting together a track of climate, transportation, and housing related climate events and sessions at Climate Week New York, which is happening the week of September 20th. That's a Sunday, so that week in New York City. And on Thursday of that week, I think it's the 24th, in the afternoon, we're doing a panel with the NYU Rudin Center, and you're moderating it's on autonomous vehicles. And so I'm curious if there's one thing, what's something that you're looking forward to asking us or expanding on now that you're been such a regular attendee at autonomous events, and now you'll be in control of the microphone. What are you going for first?
I'm really excited to be moderating this panel. Thanks for having me to do that as well. And our panel is going to be great. We're still waiting on confirmation before we announce the speakers audience. That's for the audience there. But the speakers are going to be a really good representation of folks from across the spectrum of believers and skeptics, and folks who are more inside the industry and folks who are more outside the industry. It's going to be a really great and broad ranging panel. And I'm really looking forward to coming up with the questions with the team. I want to make sure that this is not meant to be gotcha. It's meant to be informative, but I hope to bring some tough questions, questions that folks think about but don't necessarily have a platform to voice their opinion really honestly and openly. And so maybe a question that I'll ask just to preview, and maybe this doesn't get asked to the panel is why is it a good thing that we're trading our curb space via parking and storage for parking for endless circulation, right? And like that, hopefully, I'm going to leave it very open ended, and hopefully folks will call me on that or ask me, to refine or to come back with something that I hadn't thought of. So my goal is to learn something new. I don't ever want to be the smartest person in the room or feel like that's what I am, because then I'm done learning, and I hope everyone feels the same way when they're in these rooms.
All right. Well, for those folks who are going to be in New York, September 24th, Thursday, preparing for emerging mobility, you'll be able to uh, find out more and register for that soon. The format of this podcast has us, we always have links in our newsletter. And so we picked a couple links out in this week's newsletter that I just wanted to get your impression or thoughts on. And I'll just go through them and we'll see how they go. So the first one I want to talk about is article from KUT News about a new affordable condo community in East Austin that only has one parking space. This is it's called the Ivory, and it's the second in a series of developments in Austin. The first phase was two buildings with a combined total of 28 condos, 20 of which were considered affordable. When Austin got rid of its parking mandates, I think that was actually 2 years ago, maybe, they
Mhm.
paused their second phase and went back to the drawing board and came back now with a building that has 53 condos in it, 40 of which are affordable. And there's just one parking space, which I think is actually an on-street space for accessibility. And these folks have access to some car share vehicles. But this seems like a great development. It seems like the kind of thing that we're always talking about. What do you think about this?
So folks can click through and read the article, but I want to bring uh, attention to a point here that I was curious how this was going to go when Austin removed its parking mandates from its municipal zoning code and developers code. Is there just because something is not zoned for parking doesn't necessarily mean the developer or the project sponsor is going to voluntarily produce no parking spots. And where I was hopeful that this was going to go, and it now seems like this is the first of hopefully many new developments, where Austin is rich in transit and rich in accessibility to destinations, is the funders, the lenders, the banks were going to feel burdened by this lack of experience of not building larger developments without parking, which has been the norm for underwriters for a long time. They know how a bank underwriter for a loan will know how to price that risk into how much they're charging per dollar, right? That they're lending to build this project. And what I'm curious to see, and I'm going to dig deeper into this, is if it's possible to understand, was this more expensive, or was the developer able to demonstrate that parking was not necessary here and that would drive up overall costs, and um, people who choose to move here voluntarily don't have cars and therefore will be able to afford to live here and make the project pencil. So it's sort of this sort of game of 10-foot wall, 11-foot ladder that I think this project is cut out in a lot of ways. And hopeful to see how other banks use this as a comp for building denser developments with limited to no transit, or parking rather, in Austin and other places that don't have a minimum parking requirement anymore.
Yeah, it's an open question. It's something we want to research and learn a lot more about. The
Yeah.
second link I sent to you was one from Denver, Colorado. They recently raised parking rates in Denver, and they have this money kind of like a parking benefit district in a way. It goes into a fund that was supposed to be supporting various mobility options, including sidewalk build out, bike infrastructure, safety projects, and transit. But there's a post here, Denver City Council members want guardrails on parking meter fund, arguing the intent has been stretched. And it turns out there's a couple city council members arguing that it's been used to rip out to $200,000 was used to remove safe bike infrastructure downtown, or $100,000 was spent to replace vetted safety design after wealthy residents complained, or they allocated $8.4 million to parking related contracts, which is more than half of the funds. So they're asking the city to come to a agreement to spend it all on Vision Zero. This is an interesting question in that, on one hand, I think, this is probably a smarter plan than what's been going on, but also this is not truly a parking benefit district kind of concept where we're spending the money locally, highly visible. I'm just curious if you had any thoughts on this post.
Yeah. So the questions I would have to ask more questions about this, but to have a real insight on it because I'm not there. I haven't sat with it for too long. But the questions are: is this the first time that Denver or a city of its size and stature has done anything like this, or they implemented a policy? So if so, we can learn a lot from this natural experiment, the outcomes of how money is allocated, how the revenue in matches the revenue going out, and we can sort of course correct for in version 2.0. So I'm not going to be too upset just yet. I will be upset if this continues, if the chicanery continues into the future, because I think having a defined parking benefit district with defined outcomes and expectations is a great way to do exactly what we were talking about in the beginning of this conversation, which is communicate that your tax dollars, Denver residents and folks who work in Denver as well and live outside, this benefits a huge percentage of the population that moves around the area. Um, and so if I can now see where every $1 I'm spending on parking downtown, where does that go to help me move when I'm not in my car, right? And how can I tell the stories of how can I get around safer, better, faster? How can I not be forced into driving if I don't want to, and choose to drive when I know that if tomorrow I choose to bike to work, there's going to be a protected bike lane that I then contributed to. So I think this is a great opportunity for the city council to course correct, tell the stories about what they got wrong. Don't
Mhm.
pretend like this was some great experiment that's a failure, or that we're gonna we're gonna sweep the learnings under the rug because we're afraid of backlash. Tell the stories, understand where the challenges were, but then go forward and correct it. And I think tell that story then once we have version 2.0 about how this can be a model for other towns nationwide. So I commend Denver for taking this step forward. I think the course correction is going to be very important, and then triple down on the communications here. Really
All right.
focus on telling these stories.
All right. And one more here, a New York one for you. Um, this article is from military.com. Air Force Marine Veterans Company tackles daunting task. New York City parking. So I read these headlines and I dig it. I'm like, what could this be? And this is an interesting app where these two fellows are making an application called Vleyr, I think, Vleyr, which is a set of 1099 drivers, so gig economy type drivers who are, I think, all veterans who stand by ready to move your vehicle during alternate side parking days or any other time in New York when you need someone to get in your car and just move it from one place to another for you. And I thought this was a interesting idea, and I'm curious what your perspective is. Is this business going to succeed? Do you need it? What do you think?
I think it will draw some interest. I think there are a lot of people that are very frustrated with the parking mandates, and owning a car in New York is very overwhelming for a lot of folks who don't need to use it every day. You're paying for, I mean, we're paying for you to store your car on our streets for the most part. So this will apply to I think non-metered parking in residential areas where there's alternate side parking. Alternate side parking happens in a lot of places 1 to 3 times per week, which is probably too much, but it does cause a lot of challenges for folks who have other responsibilities during the hours where there's alternate side parking. So I commend these two veterans for identifying a challenge that a lot of New Yorkers are facing. Commend them for approaching it with a solution that also can get some folks paid, especially our veterans who are often struggle to find work after leaving the service. And so that is excellent. I'm not going to criticize the app, but I'm going to criticize the underlying challenge here, which is parking in New York has become an arcane, really sort of rusted process, right? There are several million parking spots in New York. Takes up something like 6 to 12% of the total footprint of all of New York. And the way that we go about managing it is to say basically free for all. It's free most of the places, and the only real um, for the kind of sandbox boundary is where and when you're allowed to park, but there's nothing, as the late Professor Shoup would say, there's nothing market priced about this. It's all free all the time, and what you're paying for instead is the time that you have to spend to move the car to come up with to follow these rules, which may or may not be also in conflict with one another. There's lots of funny situations of signs with five or six different uh, restrictions, and it's very hard to read if you're not the person who, who made the sign up in the first place. So I'm excited to see how this works. It'd be really interesting to follow the story to understand the feedback a little bit. But really, I want to call on our mayor, on our city council, on our governor, on anybody who has a chance to really take a look at how we're allocating space on our streets in New York City and find a way in the future to make it more legible through a market-based pricing system that rewards people uh, uh, for paying for the car that they own and operate in New York and store.
Right. I mean, just to tie this all up, I mean, it's kind of in a city where there's a lot going on with parking in the news, whether they should have permits, the garbage dumpster
Hmm.
controversies on the Upper West Side. I think, it's and even talking about our autonomous vehicles, I mean, this is a system that, it's got there have been similar street valet services. I mean, if you're going to pay someone to move your car a couple of times a month, why not just park it out in the outskirts on Long Island or somewhere and have it brought to you when you need it, or take a train out there, right? Like, I mean,
Hmm.
it's sometimes these ideas are so close to what could actually just work. You use a car share
Hmm.
vehicle instead of instead of owning your own that sits there all day, and
Yeah,
we're so close.
it's car brain mentality. Really, it's a cultural problem that folks can't see past their own windshield.
Right,
Ironically, right, is that they're
right.
only thinking about how can I, and it's the ultimate commons problem, right? There's limited public space, and everyone thinks about their own vehicle, and so many people are thinking about where am I going to park, even like the night before an activity. They're planning on their parking routine instead of enjoying the activity that they're going to park to. It's the anxiety of driving to and getting to a place and then not finding parking, or having to spend an arm and a leg to park your vehicle to then never use it during the time where it's parked. It's this. I don't have to tell you this, Tony. You are the president of the Parking Reform Network, but I'm just empathizing with you here about the struggle here to just get folks to think about a future where parking is a secondary thought function rather than being able to connect with neighbors and friends and go to events and really use the city or suburb to your best advantage.
Right. Well, Sam, thanks for being the experimental victim of our first attempt at this podcast. And I thanks to anyone who's listening to this for the first time. Please let us know what you liked and what you didn't like. We're going to try this on a regular basis, hopefully next week as well, or if not, then soon again. And thanks for listening to This Week with PRN, as we're calling it. And yeah, thanks, Sam.
Thanks for having me, Tony.